Hello, everyone. Good afternoon. It's afternoon now, isn't it? I think we've just clocked over. Thank you all for coming. It's a delight to be here. I am delighted to be joined by Amna Abdullatif, one of the founders of the Three Hijabis. Amna, hello, how are you?
Hello, thank you. Is this on? I don't know whether this... Can you hear me all right? Great. It's really lovely to be here. Thank you all for coming today and looking forward to the conversation.
Yeah, so this is a question that I love to ask women who love football. Where did your love for the game start?
God, my love for the game, and I tell this all the time, everywhere I go, is my mum. My mum is a crazy, and I apologise to Manchester folk or any Man City, Manchester United fans, because my mum is a fanatical Liverpool fan and has been since the age of 10. Yay, a fan here. I guess my mum's side of the family particularly grew up around football. My granddad was the chairman for the local club that he set up in the northeast, and so when we used to spend summers there, we used to spend a lot of time going to local football matches with local towns and sitting on the sidelines and trying to cheer on the local team, which is now I think in the second division, so it was like very local, very new team, and now doing relatively well. But she always talks so passionately about her love for Liverpool particularly. And she's not from Liverpool. I took her to her first game literally a couple of years ago for her 60th birthday. And she just feels like it's family, and she always talks about football feeling like family. And that, she'd always tell us stories about Bill Shankly particularly, who she thought was, an icon, somebody who she felt was a pioneer, somebody who is a socialist and very grounded in his roots, and protected the Liverpool team and the game. And so that's kind of where it stemmed from. My great-nan was also a big Sunderland fan, which is kind of the northeast, they're all from the northeast, and so she kind of kept quite local. And she always just have match of the day on. There was always, if the football was on, we'd all have to sit and watch the football, and that's kind of been like the story. And although I never kind of got into that love of football, and partly I think I lived in northwest London for a long time after coming back to the UK from Libya, and a lot of the association at the time in the early 90s particularly was so negative around football. So when there was a game on, because we were very close to Wembley, it was always kind of that time where, as a young Muslim, you were told to kind of stay at home, don't go out when there's a football match on. And so my association with football started to be really kind of skewed by this idea of safety and whether I belonged, and whether it was even a space for somebody who was, from my background to kind of even be interested and engaged in football. And so it kind of shifted, I guess, in the 90s, how I felt about football as a game. So even though we'd sit and watch it as a family and it was how we would socialize, it wasn't something that I thought that is a space for me to kind of be engaging in, which is a shame. It's kind of, and it's taken me time now to kind of reflect back over the period of particularly with the work of the Three Hijabis, of actually how do you reclaim spaces and how do you make sure that nobody ever feels that they don't belong in a space that actually is meant for everyone. Football was never meant to be just a white working class male thing to do, and it definitely was not meant for people who would use that game as a way to vilify or, excuse abuse towards minoritized people and communities that were trying to access that game. So I'm trying my best. We've gone to lots of games since, and we're trying to kind of, really use our work to reclaim the narrative and reclaim that space for everyone.
That's a term that I really love, because I think a lot of women will have had an experience where they felt out of place. I remember I grew up, I was the oldest grandchild. My brother couldn't sit still for 90 minutes, so I was the girl who then went with my granddad to the games back home in Peterborough. And then I loved playing it as a child, got to secondary school, and it was girls do girls sports, boys do boys sports. So it was hockey, it was netball, it was rounders for me. And at primary school, I was encouraged to play football. I played rugby. I was in the district tag rugby team. So I was looking at the boys and I was going, they're doing what I want. Why is this not a space for me? And even I left school in 2018, and even in 2018, we were pushing for a women's football team through the school, and we weren't allowed it. And they didn't give us the reasons why. So actually the narrative of reclaiming a space, I find really interesting.
Yeah, and I mean, so much has changed, hasn't it, over the last couple of years, particularly with the rise in the women's game. But God, to think that, I went to an all-girls school, and all we had was hockey, and we had, tennis, and the rounders, and all of these kind of games that are, I guess, seen to be more feminine and female-oriented, and that was, in the 90s, and to think that even now, we're still in a space where, women and girls in schools are still fighting to have a space to be able to play football if they wanted to. But also lots of spaces still where, the girls are having to play in the boys' team because they haven't facilitated spaces for girls to play against other girls. And I think about at a local level, I supported a local team which is Ardwick FC because they didn't have a home pitch, they didn't have a space where they would play, and the couple that run the club said to me, we've got so many girls that come in and we have to squeeze them to play with the boys, even though really there's enough for them to kind of play together as well, but there wasn't any investment. Any time that they would seek any kind of funds, they were given funds for the boys to play, but they weren't given anything for the girls to play. And so they were having to kind of utilize the money that they were getting for the boys' game to try and actually support the girls as well to play. And this is very recent, and I think, God, we haven't kind of moved on enough, I think, to kind of create the space where, why is sport being segregated by gender? It just doesn't make sense as to why we've done that. But I think things are changing, and I think they're changing quite quickly, rapidly now with the success of the women's game. And I hope it continues, because I think there's a definite interest, as there always has been. But I think now women need to see a future in the game, because for many they would play, but then there wasn't anywhere to go beyond kind of playing in your local team or at school, and that's shifting, and we need to see much more of that shift happening rapidly, I think.
Well, you mentioned it. I think obviously the Euros win at Wembley for the women has brought about a lot of change, particularly with more teams creating women's and girls teams at sort of like every level as well. There's different age groups as well, which is brilliant to see. And you mentioned Wembley. It's also something and a place that's really important in where you and the two other people you work with in the Three Hijabis started your work.
Yeah. So the story of the Three Hijabis was quite random and unexpected. Like I said, football was not necessarily what we comment on previously. A lot of our background is in the violence against women and girls space and equalities-related work around anti-racism and Islamophobia. And so this was quite random, but it kind of kick-started during the men's Euros actually 2 and a bit years ago now, and we were just meeting for, after COVID, when things started opening up. I'd gone down to London for a break to visit my two friends who are Shaista and Huda, who are the other parts of the Three Hijabis. And we took a picture while we were watching the Ukraine-England game in a bar in the hotel that I was staying at. And it went viral for some bizarre reason. I was like, why are people actually liking this? I don't understand. It's 3 Muslim women watching a football game, and people went insane at the idea that, oh my God, there's Muslim women that actually like football, that actually are interested in the game. And to me, it felt really bizarre. To Shaista, who's a journalist, she was like, this is the stuff that people love to eat up. You're ticking lots of boxes, gender, race, and faith and so on. And I was like, God, the things that people will like. And I thought, fine, and we started getting contacted by media media. There was an article in The Guardian that also went viral. We started doing talks about football and why it was important for, the inclusivity of the England team and the importance of wearing of the rainbow armband, the taking of the knee, how these are all sending a very clear message about what is important for that England side and what was important nationally for us to talk about in relation to some of the big issues of the time, where the politics of even now, very polarizing and very difficult. Actually, what we needed was some joy and some hope, and that's what we talked about within the game. My mum would call me up and say, I never thought I'd see the day when my daughter is commenting around football, and I was like, well, here you are, Mum. I was like, this is what it's come to. All those years of you going in my ear about football and how important it is all coming out now. And then on that final match between England and Italy, myself and Shaista and Huda had agreed to go to Wembley because Huda lives there, not because we'd got tickets to the game, unfortunately. And we thought we'll just make a night of it because her boys wanted to watch the game, although they're basketball fans, but we managed to convince them to come and sit with us. And it was a really enjoyable evening. And then as we got to the penalties and the three young players, black players who missed those penalties, and it came to an end and England had lost, I remember sitting on the sofa with the other two, and we all of us were like, this is going to be huge in terms of the racist abuse that not only the players going to get, but that fans and people across the country will face as a result of losing this match. And instead of being proud of the England team and the success, at a time where nobody expected them to even get to a quarterfinal game, let alone actually get to the final and, push the Italian team right to penalties, that what we were having to talk about was actually the issue around racism in this country and how it showcases itself in these big tournaments. And so we slept on it, and I think all of us were really heavy with there was lots of texts and messages, and social media was already lots of racist, vile stuff that was going on online, and it was really all feeling quite heavy. And in the morning, I got up late, as they'll tell you all the time. I hate mornings. I am not a morning person. Do not wake me up early if I don't have to be somewhere. But they got me up, and they're like, oh, we've started to draft a petition, and we think we should put out something because we had a bit of a platform. The media was still interested in what we had to say. I was on BBC Manchester Radio that morning to talk about my reflections of the final game, and we started to talk about why we have this problem in this country that we need to address around racism. And the petition went out, and literally, as me and Shaista were heading back home, or I thought I was heading back home, it started we were up to 15,000 by the first hour of people signing the petition and sharing it. And the news media was contacting us, asking us for comments about our petition. And I'm like, flipping heck, literally, I was like, to Shaista, I was like, I parked outside her house in Oxford to make it easy to get back, because trains weren't running very smoothly back then either. I said to her, I have to stay in, so I ended up staying in Oxford for 2 nights. I took some time off work because we were literally on the media all day, right up to the evening, doing all sorts of stuff with Lorraine on the morning telly, to BBC News, to ITV, Channel 4, the Washington Post, all sorts of media that were coming up to us. And within 48 hours, we'd reached over 1 million signatures on the petition to ban racists from football. Now, there was no expectation that we were ever going to ban racists or racists from the game, but it was about making a stand and making a message, and it was asking the government to take seriously the banning orders and to address how to extend those, and also for the FA to take responsibility for what had happened at this game and the impact of that, and that it kind of just is. It's got so big at such a short period of time, and we thought, 2 weeks and it'll all die down, and it didn't. it didn't die down after 2 weeks. There were still lots of conversations to have, and I think it really piqued the national interest. And partly because I think lots of people were kind of like, what is the point of taking the knee? Like, they were really questioning the point of why all these players were taking the knee and why it was even important in this day and age, because apparently we're post-racial, you know, and we're all about, we're too woke nowadays, and we're all past that. And those same people were then saying, emailing us and saying, I get it now. I get why those players had to take the knee. I get the message that they were trying to send, because we never thought it was going to turn into this. And I think that was a really important kind of, I guess, learning for everyone. And it's just unfortunate that we have to have like these big moments in our history or in a time where we have to then start talking about these issues rather than seeing them as an ongoing piece of work that we're all part of. And, you know, anti-racism isn't a thing that you just do and it stops and you've done it and it's, you know, a done deal. Like any equalities, it's about, you know, you're constantly having to review, you're constantly having to address, you're constantly having to challenge, you're constantly having to monitor yourself and do the work. It's not a one-time thing. And that's, you know, and that's kind of been our message across the board is in that campaign. And still now, you know, much to the FA and the Premier League's probably, we had lots of meetings with the FA at the beginning, and I'm not sure they really got who we are and what we do, and it was always very problematic, those meetings. They weren't particularly the nicest meetings to have because they thought they were doing the stuff that they were supposed to do, and didn't appreciate these women that weren't in football telling them that they could be doing something slightly differently. But, you know, it is what it is. I think, you know, we stand there as a kind of a challenge to footballing authorities, and some of them feel like that's a good space to have, like people outside of that sector coming in and kind of challenging them. Unfortunately, as I'm sure you're aware, it's a very closed space, and they don't really like outsiders very much in the footballing industry, particularly where there's power. So it's been a struggle to get through, but we still, you know, journalists love us, and they contact us every time there is an issue around racism or misogyny in the game, and you know, we get to headline lots of news media and keep, you know, the momentum going on these issues. And it's a hard slog, and all of the work that we've done today has just been off the back of, you know, us just wanting to kind of continue that conversation and that work, and only recently have we set it up as a kind of an entity, as an organization, to try and get some funding in to be able to maintain it long term, because otherwise it's too much. We all have, you know, full-time jobs and other priorities, so it's hard to kind of keep the momentum going when you know, you've got other things to do and you don't necessarily have the funding to continue that work.
We're 2 years on now from that final, as you mentioned. When you look back and when you reflect and look at the current landscape, do you feel that there has been change and improvement? I know there was an incident at Gillingham a few weeks ago where a racist incident was caught on camera, and then by the end of the day, the person who made those gestures was then arrested and had been charged and banned by the club. Is that the kind of reactiveness that we're now seeing more across the board than when the petition was started?
I think we've definitely seen like a huge kind of increase in the reaction by clubs, and I think it's a responsibility for clubs, but I think, you know, the footballing authorities, I guess, as the Premier League and the FA and FIFA and all of these organisations need to be setting some rules or, you know, ways look forward around how these clubs need to manage these situations. But definitely, I think I've seen a huge shift. I've been to Anfield a number of times now since with my mum for various games, and, you know, there's an atmosphere shift, I think, and lots of support. I have to say, I did go to a Man United game, and that did not feel safe very recently, and that was a shame. I think partly because there was a lot of protest against the club owners at the same time as everyone trying to get in to watch the game. But it was very messy, very messy. And I think, you know, the stewards, you know, hold a lot of ability to create a safe space. And if they're trained well and they can notice when things aren't going well and when things are reported to them, then I think clubs can then instantly react to those things. But I think we need to build the confidence of fans to be able to also go out and say, actually, this person was making me feel uncomfortable, or they did something, or they said something, and to be able to report those things in an easy way. And I think I've seen lots of clubs do like apps for reporting. I think we need to see much more of that, because I think the clubs, if they want to create that safety in that space for all of their fans, I think that's important. I think the problem we have is also thinking about who works in football. And those people that work in football, do they feel safe in the environments that they work in? Because it's very easy to kind of, you know, call out somebody who's called you a racist term. It's not very easy to call that out if you are working in those organizations, or if it's much more subtle, which we know that sexism, racism, homophobia, you know, all of these issues, they're not people, you know, generally the least of my problems is somebody calling me a sexist or Islamophobic term, right? They're people I can dismiss and kind of get on with my day, but generally speaking, it's about who's there, who's represented, who gets to have power in these spaces. Do I feel safe as a visibly Muslim woman to be able to report things easily or not? You know, as a woman, do you feel safe in the working environments that you're put into that are predominantly male? It's you know, I think, you know, we're very quick to think about the racist, who is the bad person who does or says something to you, and not think about the racism that inherently exists across all of our institutions, and that is a problem. Because you know, it means that we can always identify a bad racist, but we don't identify it in ourselves, and all of us sit in a system that is unfortunately built on racism and sexism and homophobia and all of these isms that discriminate against lots of us in these spaces. And unless we start to think about how we address that from a systemic perspective in the game, what we'll do is we'll consistently fall into the trap of calling out the bad person who has done something that is very easy to recognize as being terrible.
So where does the education start for that?
Well, I think I always say that the education really needs to start with senior leaders in any organisation, and that includes football. Football isn't exempt just because there's loads of money in it, and you know, there's particularly in the men's game. And I think we were talking backstage a little bit about kind of, you know, what's the future for the women's game as well. And some of my concerns, and I've shared this during the World Cup with lots of people, is my concerns are the same problems that exist in the women's game will be transferred into the men's game, because there are many men who've existed in the men's game for a long time who are now going into coaching and management of the women's game with the same attitudes, the same problems, the same issues, just being transported back into the women's game. And I feel unless we kind of are really, really careful about what is happening in the women's game, we will end up in the same situation that the men's game is in, which feels a little bit stuck, because you know, although change is happening, it's not really happening fast enough. And I think when you don't see change happening fast enough, it's because the institutions haven't really changed very much, and they haven't done the work. So they need to do the work, and this is what we were saying to the FA, which is why they don't like us very much, is, you know, you need to do the work. As an organisation, you have to do the work. Don't expect, you know, they love doing the kind of the education pieces to the fans and the education, all important. They all, you know, contribute to the wider work that needs to happen. But it can't just be about, you know, us telling the fans to behave themselves. Generally speaking, the fans are very well behaved in general in most games. It's about what are you doing in your institution to change things. And I don't think that is necessarily happening with any of the equalities brackets. I think we're very good at maybe building that representation, so, you know, making sure that we've got you know, relative diversity in lots of spaces, but not necessarily actually what does that mean for those people that are coming into that space. You know, you can include more women in the job market, but then do those women feel safe when they are in that organisation? And the response generally is no, they don't. And do they have power in that space? Generally speaking, no, they don't. And so actually you're not sorting out the core problem or the root problem. You're just trying to make it look like you are by having that diversity without actually tackling the root causes of the problem. And that's a hard thing to do, because you actually have to invest your money and you actually have to invest your time to do that work. And that isn't a thing that lots of organisations want to have to commit to.
Because obviously, we can talk about the importance of having an England team that is diverse, that's representative, anti-racist, but what you're saying is the problems actually stem sort of further back and deeper down than the 11 players who at the end of the day are the figureheads.
Yeah, I mean, I think for the players, I think the representation is nice to see, because obviously they're role models. People see themselves in the players that are playing on the pitch. But I think when we're talking about football, it's not about those 11 players on the pitch, is it? It's about everyone else that makes up that ecosystem of the game. And that is much bigger than kind of the 11 players that will turn up on that pitch and do an amazing job. And hopefully, all of us will always, regardless of what the end result is, which is what we constantly say, is that we should be proud.
Yeah.
If we're England fans, let's be proud of what England delivers, even when they're having a bad day. And so, yeah, I mean, it's important to see that representation physically in terms of that space when you have players. But I think, the wider work is doing it internally and actually taking the time and investment in doing that work properly. And that's, like I said, that's not the easiest thing to be able to do.
Another thing that I want to talk about before we end this chat that's been brilliant so far is where your activism has moved to. And it was something that you mentioned at the start, something that you've got roots in, something you're very passionate about, and that's violence against women and girls, and how this movement, you're addressing a lot of the things that we're seeing in football with that. So how has the activism moved on?
Yeah, so I mean, it's after the anti-racism kind of campaign and petition and the work that was done there, we went on to create another campaign which was about addressing violence against women and girls and misogyny in football. So small topics, always people are like, what the hell are you doing? It's like, don't worry, we're figuring stuff out as we go along. But I think they're an important topic. And at the time, it was because, unfortunately, this city has become unanimous with lots of big stories about football players in both Manchester United and Man City who have been accused of really horrific violence against women and girls, abuses, whether that's domestic violence or sexual violence. And what does that mean for the game and the reputation of the game, the reputation of the clubs, but also how does it make female fans feel when these issues are not being addressed by those clubs and by the game itself. And so we set up, I think it was a couple of years, no, it must have been about a year and a bit ago, around February. And it wasn't a petition, it was kind of an open letter to the FA and the Premier League, calling on them to address 4 things that we suggested as action points around how they can tackle this issue or start to tackle this issue. And we thought we were giving them, almost like an action plan for how they can move things forward. And it included things like, putting together a Vogue charter for football around addressing these issues and for clubs to sign up to it in terms of the changes that they're willing to make. It included consent and compulsory consent training and prevention training for academies that included the first team. So at the moment they do quite a bit of stuff around the academies, but they don't actually include the first team, who, unfortunately are the ones that are always making the national headlines when they're doing horrific things. So we wanted them to include that as well. We also included something around kind of training and policies, and specifically around disciplinary action. Because the one thing that we constantly saw, and we saw this with Man United in the last 2 cases of horrific domestic violence abuses with 2 major players, was that their response was weak. the response was not quick enough. It did not respond to the issues that many women within the game and within the club wanted them to address. It was really, really slow. And then even when they did put out statements, the statements really said very little. And, you know, there has to be, if you're being accused of really violent crimes against women, there has to be a way that the club responds to that appropriately. And at the moment, what we're seeing is that they kind of try and hide it first, which is horrific and always comes out, particularly nowadays, because the journalists, I think, are much more on the ball, no puns intended, on the ball on the kind of these issues, and so they're looking for the stories, and so, you know, they're reporting on it all the time, but also when they then start talking about it, they're making really horrific decisions and choices, and it spells out a real problem then for for many women, and it should concern men as well. I mean, this isn't just a women's issue. This is anyone who is, loves football should be concerned about, what is happening when these incidents take place. Because as much as I love to kind of say, how incredible, when I talked about the England team, particularly during the Euros and, the men's team, I would talk about how incredible they are as spokespeople, as role models, as, people who young people look up to. They think that they're, the bee's knees. I mean, footballers these days have got much more power than probably any other celebrity going. But then when these incidents happen, it's important for us to call it out. It's not okay. And it doesn't, take away anything from the game or other players, but it's important that we address what is happening in the game. And I think, there's some real problems. And the Premier League, to give them fair dues, we had lots of meetings with them, we had lots of sit-downs, they invited kind of violence against women and girls organisations to talk about how they could pull this forward. They've, recruited a consultant to kind of help them with this work internally. So there is some work happening. The FA, in their usual glory, sent us a really dry email and said very little. But whatever, it's you just kind of plod along and push. And lots of this is very much more about kind of the message as opposed to kind of having them think that, we need a response back from them. But yeah, so the campaign, has kind of evolved, I guess, into this area of work that myself and Shaista and Huda have been involved in. We've worked in the violence against women and girls sector and continue to work in it for, decades. And so that experience felt like it was a moment in time. And partly journalists contact us about those issues too. Like, they're like, did you see the story? This story is coming out. Do you want to comment on it? And I'm like, okay. You're like, yeah, let's put, because this is how you put pressure on, is, utilizing the media when they're, kind of contacting you and wanting you to speak on these issues and to really push some of those narratives across. And, we've seen lots of women come out against some of the way that their clubs have responded to some of those allegations and issues. And I think that's powerful, that collective force around seeing change happen is important. And we saw that with the anti-racism campaign. If it wasn't for the fact that we got 1 million signatures, nobody would have cared who the hell we were. Like, nobody would have cared about the message. Nobody would have cared about what we were saying. So, when people come together, it makes such a huge difference to the narrative and the story. And actually then how do you create that change?
Absolutely. I think a really important point to take from that is clubs having clarity on how they respond to issues, because one of the things that just completely shocked me to the core when they did this was when Manchester United asked its women's team how it would feel about a certain situation with a number of their players at the World Cup when this came out a few days before the final, and you could tell the club had no understanding of where to go and what was the right thing to do. So providing clear framework from the Premier League to then clubs in the EFL as well, of how they respond to these issues is something that I think is really key as well, and obviously something.
And it isn't rocket science.
No.
Don't ask women to tell you, that it's okay or not okay for somebody who's been accused of domestic violence, whether they should remain in the club or not. That is not for them to decide. That should never be put onto the responsibility of women to have to tell you that. And in all honesty, if somebody's committed a crime, then why isn't there? I don't understand. Like, why isn't there a code around what you would do, whatever the crime was? Why don't clubs know what to do? And I think partly because they've kind of hidden. They spend a lot of time and a lot of money hiding some of the stuff that their players do in order to maintain them playing in the game. And I think, somebody was saying this is a very crude way to look at it. But lots of those players are money, essentially. They are very good, high-profile players that people love, and having to remove them from the game means you lose money, and that's a major concern for lots of clubs. And I'm thinking, well, shouldn't your concern actually be what that person has done, and then how do you respond to that in order to ensure the reputation of your club, to ensure that your fans feel safe and heard? It's like, it's almost like, there's some there's some real confusion around the morality, I guess, of all of these things, because it isn't rocket science, and yet they're making it seem like a really difficult thing that they're having to do, when it shouldn't actually be that difficult at all.
Well, Amna, thank you so much. That was a really interesting discussion. We've covered lots of things that I didn't think we were based on the framework.
No,
and it's,
that's not what we discussed inside, but anyway.
It's brilliant to discuss such a wide range of the topics and go in so much detail in such a short space of time. Would like to open the floor if anyone's got any questions for Amna.
Bless you, Don.
Don't worry, I'm only talking football, Amna. I was delighted that Amna came on our radio show on local station All FM the other week, and you never talked football because you had so much to say about your role as a local councillor, which was great. Perhaps we'll have you back. However, one reflection and one question for you. A couple of weeks later, we had some of the ladies who played, and I say ladies because that's what they call themselves, from the Corinthians Football Club, who were, if people know, you're nodding there, they played on Fog Lane Park in Didsbury in the 1950s, 60s and 70s, when the FA didn't let women play on their own facilities. It was frowned upon after the success of Dick Carr's Ladies, I noticed up there. And the reflection is, obviously there's a blue plaque there, and if you go down to Fog Lane Park in Didsbury, there's some wonderful murals celebrating the fact that they flew the flag for women's football when it was, almost banned. However, the media really responded very positively to you, and this is the reflection of what you were saying. Not just the local press and the local TV, but the national TV and BBC Radio, today's programme, covered it. So perhaps, thanks to you, it's raised their consciousness, or it's happening anyway. The question, though, on a very different matter, is what did you feel about the award of the World Cup to Qatar, and with their, shall we say, background, and the fact that it's likely to go to Saudi Arabia in the future?
So I won't take credit for why the media is suddenly interested, or more interested. And I think it goes to a lot of women within sports journalism who have, really taken the fore in terms of these issues, and they're the ones who are constantly contacting us for commentary and support and stuff for some of the articles that they are writing about women's football, which is appreciated, and the men's game, which is appreciated. So I think we're seeing a difference in terms of the makeup of who's actually reporting on sports, which is what we need to see more of. In terms of Qatar and Saudi in the future, and World Cup hosting rights, and the football is very political, and anyone who tells you otherwise is lying, because they know it's political, because they sit in it, and they benefit from it, and to me, when we first started the World Cup, we were speaking quite a lot about kind of Qatar and its human rights abuses and issues around, its homophobia and homophobic laws and women's rights and so forth, and that felt really important to make sure that we were talking about those issues, and that was the kind of the conversation. I think what I struggled with afterwards, however, was that it started to feel like that it was turning quite Islamophobic, as opposed to just talking about the issues that, lots of commentators then started to talk about the Arab world and started to talk about Muslims and the backwardness of Muslims, and lots of, people were kind of talking about, they were surprised to go to Qatar and see a developed country, and I'm like, I don't know what they thought, Arab countries generally look like. But there's this kind of feeling, I think, that I felt as somebody who's Arab heritage and as a Muslim, where it started to tilt beyond kind of just calling out the government and its human rights abuses to turning into very Islamophobic and anti-Arab sentiments during the World Cup, and that was not being called out. And I kind of felt like at one point I was like, somebody was, I can't remember what, I was on some radio show in London, and I can't remember what the incident was. And I remember saying to this woman, that this was Islamophobic. And she was like, oh no, it can't be Islamophobic because we're talking about Arabs or something. Like, it was like really horrific kind of like commentary about it. And I just, and I think part of the problem is that Islamophobia is really misunderstood as a form of racism, and it's very normalized. And so people feel genuinely okay to talk about, very Islamophobic things and feel okay and within their right to do so. And that feels really heavy for me to have to then constantly have to call it out. And I'm sure we'll have the same conversations when it gets to Saudi. But, if we look at where else, these football matches are going, there are hardly, countries with pinnacles of, history that is amazing either, or policies or laws that are amazing. It wasn't that long ago where Russia was hosting it. It's like, these big games are always going to be problematic, whoever hosts it. And I think the space that we hold is that we need to call out those countries for the abuses that they allow to happen in their countries, but not to turn it into a thing around individuals that maybe come from those countries, or another form of racism or another form of prejudice that feels like it's okay. So it's a bit of it was a very mixed, it was a very mixed bag, because we went in like thinking, yep, we need to talk about this and this and this, and really kind of, go against, the FIFA's decision to allow Qatar to host it, and kind of all of the corruption and stories around it. And then it was like, suddenly I'm like having to kind of think, bloody hell, like all these people are really Islamophobic. Like, well, why is it turning? Why is it turning into this? And it's like, why are the truths? I think people really struggle with holding multiple truths at the same time. Like, they really, really struggle with it. And it's, and you have to kind of push against those things when they show their heads. It's a complicated issue.
And I think that's, you can point that I'm glad you mentioned Russia. You can also look at the USA hosting the next World Cup and the issues with Roe v. Wade, and you'd look and say, I hope that there's those open dialogues when we go into that tournament as
we'll be making sure of it.
Yeah, because
because no country is going to get away with pretending that they are the pinnacle of morality, because no country is. Some are better than others, but no country is the pinnacle of any morality. And we have to call out those things. And we've done that. In terms of. This is, equalities training and equalities work is not just about a binary issue. It's about everyone, and it's really important to be able to hold everyone in that space. And I think that's the key thing. So it's going to be very important, I think, when we go down to the US and talk about those issues as well.
I think particularly with the sandwiching between the last World Cup, the World Cup that will come after, we look at from a sustainability point of view, and a lot of us within the sport having to take responsibility. You're holding a World Cup in, the next World Cup to come, across 3 countries. And the environmental impact on that, and us within the sport of, taking responsibility and, calling out issues, whether that be the issues we see socially, economically, environmentally as well. So, that, again, something where you can pinpoint one tournament that's coming in, obviously in the next 2 cycles, but then also actually looking at the one that's coming as well.
Yeah. No, it's a really important space, and I know people sometimes, they're like, oh my God, like, I think I see sometimes football fans on social media. It's like, can we just enjoy the game? And I'm like, yeah, we're enjoying the game, but we're still, we can still enjoy the game and enjoy the football with, and still call out some of the crap that's in it. It's like this is the thing about this binary thinking and this, this constant polarization of views. It's like, actually, you can do both things. Like we enjoyed the World Cup. I watched the games, during the Qatar World Cup. I enjoyed seeing, our teams play. Particularly, I enjoyed Morocco, and I have to say, I enjoyed watching Morocco as well as a fellow North African. What they're playing in the women's game as well, and just seeing kind of these underdog teams thriving and succeeding in the World Cup is really amazing to see, and see that change in representation. But you can do both. It's like you can do both. It's just okay.
Absolutely. Any more questions? No? Well, Amna, quickly before I let you go, where can we find out more about your work? Social media?
Yeah, we're on Twitter. If you're on Twitter, you can also email us. We do have a website. If you just Google the Three Hijabis, there's loads of things that come up, and hopefully our website should come up first, although it's very outdated, but it's got all of our information on there. It'd be nice to hear from you. We're kind of asking people to share their stories with us about the game, and we've had lots of, particularly women from minoritized backgrounds contact us and tell us, how inspired they felt. Like actually they feel like they can turn up to a game and feel safe doing so, and be able to proudly support their teams publicly. And I think these are, we'd love to hear stories like that. It really kind of keeps the momentum going and really shares the importance of actually doing this work effectively. So thank you.
Brilliant. Amna, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.